Welcome to this deep dive. We're tackling decision making today, and get this, our sources are a total mix. We've got a textbook, some academic papers on like heuristics and stuff, and even, believe it or not, real world business case studies.
That's a great combo. Really gives us a well-rounded view.
Exactly. So get ready, folks, because we're going to unlock some serious decision making power today, from those mental shortcuts to some, well, let's be honest, more complex analyses.
The goal is to walk away with some practical tools.
Yeah.
Things you can actually use to make better choices, whether it's work, life, you name it.
Love it. Now, the textbook, it's called Decision Analysis for Management Judgment, and it kicks off with this story. It's about someone, feeling stuck in their job. They're thinking about, get this, becoming a consultant. I bet a lot of our listeners know that feeling, right? Wanting to make a change, but kind of overwhelmed by like all the stuff you got to consider.
Oh, totally. That anecdote, it's like the perfect illustration of how messy decisions really are, out there in the real world. It's rarely a simple yes or no. It's more like,
A maze.
yeah, a mess
Yeah.
with all these paths and hidden turns, and then bam, unexpected consequences pop up.
Ugh, don't I know it? So the book then jumps into these things called decision trees and utility functions. They use Phillips Petroleum, the oil company, as an example, specifically their oil exploration ventures. Sounds intense, right? But is this something like normal people can actually use? Or is it just for, big companies?
No, no, definitely applicable to everyday life. Think of a decision tree like a roadmap for your choices. Each branch, it's like a different path you could take. Helps you see where each decision might lead, the potential outcomes. And then the utility function. That's where it gets personal. It's all about your risk tolerance.
So it's not just about the numbers, like cold, hard calculations.
Right. Two people, they could be looking at the same decision tree, same potential outcomes and all, but make totally different choices.
Right.
Why? Because of how comfortable they are with risk. Someone's super risk averse, they might go for the smaller guaranteed win. Someone else loves the thrill, might choose the path with like a huge potential payoff, even if it's way less certain.
Makes total sense. And that reminds me, the book also talks about heuristics, mental shortcuts, right? Like when I buy a new gadget, sometimes I just go with the brand I recognize instead of like actually comparing specs and stuff. Is that good, bad? What's the deal with heuristics?
Heuristics are tricky. They can be good or bad, really.
Yeah.
On the one hand, efficient, right? Help us avoid decision fatigue, all that.
Yeah.
But they can also, and this is important, lead to biases.
Oh, interesting. So like, how does that work?
Well, the book talks about the minimalist approach, where you basically just pick a random feature to decide.
Yeah.
Or the recognition heuristic, where, yeah, you go with what you know, even if you know nothing about it, really.
Okay. Yeah. That's me at the grocery store. If I recognize the brand, I'm more likely to buy it, even if there's like a cheaper one or a healthier one right there. Does that mean I'm a lazy thinker?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Our brains, they love to conserve energy. Heuristics, it's like they evolved to help us make quick decisions because the world's a complex place. The key, though, is to be aware of them. Like, when are they helpful and when might they be, leading us astray?
So how do we know when to trust our gut and when to really, analyze everything?
That's the million-dollar question. Depends on the stakes, really.
Hmm.
Small, everyday stuff, heuristics, they're fine. But big decisions, the ones with consequences, yeah, usually worth slowing down, thinking it through.
That makes sense. Okay, so speaking of big decisions, what about when you've got multiple goals? You're trying to achieve a bunch of different things at once. The book talks about smart analysis for this, and they use choosing a new office location as an example. Now, I've heard of SMART goals, but how does that help you make a decision?
It's like creating a personalized scoring system. That's a smart analysis. You break down your big goal into smaller bits, attributes. It's like a checklist for what matters most to you. Then you give each attribute a weight based on how important it is. This forces you to think about trade-offs, which is
Well,
crucial.
Okay, so with the office, you'd have rent, location, size, all that jazz, and you'd have to figure out what's non-negotiable, what you're willing to compromise on.
Exactly. And here's a cool tip from the book. Compare the results of your fancy smart analysis to your initial gut feeling. If they match, great, you're probably good to go. But if they're totally different, that's when you got to dig deeper, figure out why.
So even with a structured approach like that, our gut still matters.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Our intuition often picks up on stuff our conscious mind misses.
Mhm.
It's not about logic versus intuition. It's about using both together to make the best call.
Love that. Okay, so now we get to the part that honestly kind of makes my head spin. Probability. This section of the book, whoa, it talks about mutually exclusive events, conditional probability, even Bayes' theorem. Do we really need to know all that to make good decisions? Like, for real?
The math can be a bit much, I get it, but grasping the basic ideas of probability, that can be really helpful, especially when things are uncertain. Think of it this way. Every decision, it's kind of like a gamble, right? There's a chance things won't go as planned. Probability helps us figure out those chances so we make, more informed bets.
Okay, I'm listening. Give me an example. How does this actually play out?
Sure. So the book, the user product launch example, the success, it hinges on a bunch of factors. Market demand, what the competitors are doing, production delays, all that. Probability can help you estimate how likely each of those things is to happen in different ways.
So instead of just saying, oh, I think there's a 50-50 chance this product will succeed, you can actually get more specific.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is, research shows we're actually terrible at estimating probabilities intuitively. Like, we tend to be overconfident in our predictions. Plus, we fall for these biases that mess with our judgment.
So, like, we might think something's more likely to happen just because it's easy to imagine or because we heard about something similar recently.
You got it. The book calls that the availability heuristic. We overestimate the likelihood of events that are, readily available in our memory. It's like you watch a shark attack movie, suddenly you're terrified of swimming in the ocean.
Yeah.
Even though statistically, your chances of getting attacked by a shark are, like, minuscule.
Wow, that's a great example. So even if we're not like math geniuses, understanding probability and these biases, it can help us be more realistic, right, about the risks and the opportunities.
100%. It's all about being more aware of how our minds work and using that knowledge to make better choices.
Okay, so probability, right, and how our gut can totally mislead us. But what about those times when you have to make a decision and you don't even have all the information? Or the information you have, it's, iffy. Isn't that just asking for trouble?
Not always. Actually, the textbook, it talks about how imperfect information can still be valuable. Weird, right? Think of it like you're a farmer, okay, and you're trying to decide if you should treat your soil. There might be a virus, but you're not sure. Now, there's a test, but it's not perfect. Do you still get the test done?
I guess it depends on how much the test costs versus, like, what happens if the virus wipes out your whole crop?
Exactly. So the book introduces this thing called the expected value of imperfect information. It helps you weigh the cost of getting more info, right, against the potential benefits of making a smarter decision. Sometimes, even a flawed test, it can give you enough to, tip the scales in your favor.
That's a good way to look at it. So it's not about always having perfect information, but more about understanding what you do know and how reliable it is, and then making the best choice you can with that.
Right on. And, those business case studies you sent over, there was one, I think it was about a company deciding whether to invest in some new microbiological product. They were facing a real dilemma, huge potential for profit, but also a big risk of failure. Classic business problem.
Yeah, that one. It felt very real world, like something any business leader could be facing. And the book suggested decision trees for that, right? To like map it all out.
Yep. Decision trees are super helpful when you have sequential decisions. Like, you map out each decision point, all the possible outcomes, the probabilities, the payoffs, everything. In that case, the company, first they had to decide, do we invest at all? And then, depending on what happens, decide again, do we keep investing or pull out?
It's like a flow chart, but for choices. I get it. Helps you see the big picture and like really weigh the risks and rewards along the way.
And that case study, it also mentioned present value. It's all about the time value of money. Money today is worth more than the same amount in the future. Why? Because you can invest it today and earn more over time.
So you gotta like discount future cash flows to make a fair comparison?
Yeah.
Sounds kind of finance.
Decisions. Think of it this way. Someone offers you $100 today or $100 a year from now. Which do you take?
The $100 now, obviously.
Right, because you could invest it and maybe have more than $100 in a year. That's the time value of money in action.
Okay, yeah, I'm following. But moving on from decision trees for a sec, one of those academic papers you shared, it talked about simulation, sounded super high-tech. Is that something like normal people can use, or is that just for, data science folks?
Simulation, it's powerful, yeah, but not just for the experts. It's really helpful when you've got a complex decision, and the outcome depends on a ton of factors. Imagine you're trying to decide between two products to launch, okay, but the success of each one, it hinges on things like your production costs, customer demand, and even what your competitors do. Lots of moving parts.
Sounds like a nightmare. How does simulation help with that?
Instead of just guessing or using basic estimates, you can use a computer model. And this model, it simulates tons of possible outcomes, each with its own probability. It's like running virtual experiments to see what might happen, under different conditions.
So instead of just saying, we think this product has a 60% chance of succeeding, you actually see a whole range of possibilities, from like huge success to total flop.
Exactly. That paper, they had this example, a company trying to choose between making a commemorative plate or a figurine. It's like a collectible thing. By simulating all the variables, they could see which product was more likely to actually make them money, even with all the uncertainty involved.
That's pretty cool, like having a crystal ball. But instead of magic, it's data and algorithms. Speaking of data, something that jumped out at me from the textbook was like revising our judgments based on new information. They even brought up Bayes' theorem, which I vaguely remember from statistics class. Was that a nightmare?
Bayes' theorem, yeah, can sound intimidating, but it's a super useful idea, honestly. Think of it this way. You have a belief about something, right? Like, let's say, the chances of your favorite team winning their next game. Then, new info comes in, the star player is injured, uh-oh. Bayes' theorem helps you update your initial belief based on that new evidence.
So you're like adjusting your mental model based on what you learn.
Right. It's a more formal way of doing what we do naturally all the time. We're constantly getting new information that makes us rethink things, challenge our assumptions. Bayes' theorem just gives us a, more structured approach.
Okay, that clicks. It's like how doctors use new test results to refine a diagnosis, or investors use market data to, tweak their portfolio. But here's the thing. How do we know the information we're getting is even good? What if it's based on, like, bad data or biased sources?
That's the crucial question. And one of the papers you shared, it dives into that. All the biases that can mess us up when we're dealing with probabilities. We talked about the availability heuristic earlier, but there are others lurking out there.
Like what? Give me examples. I'm kind of obsessed with this idea that our brains can trick us into making bad choices.
Okay, so there's anchoring, where we get fixated on the first piece of information we see, even if it's totally irrelevant. That paper mentioned a study. People spun a wheel, right, with random numbers before estimating the percentage of African countries in the UN. Crazy thing is, those who spun higher numbers, they gave higher estimates, even though the wheel spin had nothing to do with the actual answer.
That's wild. Like, our brains grab onto anything, even randomness, to try and make sense of the world.
It's true. And then there's overconfidence, which we all know that one. We overestimate our abilities and how accurate our judgments are. It's that I got this feeling even when maybe we don't.
Oof, been there. What about the conjunction fallacy? The paper, they had this example, a woman named Linda. She's described as outspoken, passionate about social justice. People were more likely to say she's a bank teller, a A&D, a feminist activist, even though that's less likely than just being a bank teller, statistically speaking.
The conjunction fallacy, classic. Shows how much our brains love to create stories, see patterns, even when they don't match reality. We judge how likely something is based on like how well it fits our preconceived notions or stereotypes.
So even with hard numbers staring us in the face, our intuition, our biases, they can still steer us wrong. That's kind of unsettling.
It is, but awareness is the first step. Once we know about these biases, we can start to, come up with strategies to deal with them. One thing is to really focus on base rates, the statistical information. Another is to actively seek out different perspectives, challenge our own assumptions.
So it's like having a mental checklist. Before you make a big decision, am I falling for the availability heuristic? Am I anchoring to something irrelevant? Am I being overconfident?
Yep. Being more mindful of how our minds work and putting those safeguards in place so those shortcuts don't lead us down the wrong path.
I like it. Now, going back to something you mentioned earlier about the emotions involved in making decisions, the textbook had this thing about framing effects. Basically, how the information is presented can change our choices, even if the options themselves are, like, objectively the same.
Framing effects, they're powerful. Classic example is the Asian disease problem. People get two options, right, for responding to this imaginary outbreak. Both options, same number of lives saved, but one is framed in terms of lives saved, the other lives lost.
And people go for the lives saved framing, even though it's the same outcome mathematically. That's crazy.
Shows how our emotions can overpower logic. We're drawn to things that feel positive, safe, even if they're not the best choice, rationally speaking.
So it's not just the facts, it's how those facts are presented and how that makes us feel.
Exactly. Marketing folks, advertising, they know this stuff. They use framing to, like, nudge us towards certain products, even if there are better options out there.
Oh, yeah, like those limited time offer things creates a sense of urgency, even if the product is always available at basically the same price.
Perfect example. The takeaway is be aware of those framing effects.
Right.
Try to, like, deconstruct the framing and get to the actual information underneath.
It's like seeing through the matrix. Now, one of the business case studies, it was about a company that was struggling because they were stuck in the past, using outdated strategies. The book calls that cognitive inertia, right?
Yep, cognitive inertia. It's our tendency to resist change. We stick to what's familiar even when it's not working anymore. It's like driving with a parking brake on.
Oh, I get it. The company in the case study, they were a TV station, and they were losing viewers because they weren't keeping up with what people wanted to watch, too focused on what had worked before.
Happens all the time. Companies, people, we get attached to past successes, and we miss new trends, miss chances to innovate. It's like that saying, what got you here won't get you there.
So how do we break free from that inertia?
The book suggests scenario planning. It's like a thought experiment about the future. You imagine different possibilities, good and bad, and come up with strategies to deal with them.
So you're like creating a map of the future, so you're not totally blindsided by change.
Exactly. Scenario planning, it forces you to step outside your comfort zone, challenge assumptions, consider different viewpoints. Super useful in industries where things are changing fast, like tech or finance.
Makes sense. But sometimes it's not just about being stuck. It's about like clinging to something that's clearly not working because we've already invested so much in it. The book, they call it the sunk cost fallacy, right?
Oh yeah, the sunk cost fallacy. It's a tricky one. We keep investing in something, even when it's a lost cause, because we've already put in time, money, effort, all that.
The example from the textbook, the Concorde, right? The supersonic plane. Even when it was clear it was never going to be profitable, the governments, they kept throwing money at it, partly because they'd already invested so much.
It's like, I've come this far, can't give up now. But the smart move, rationally, is to focus on what it'll cost and what you'll gain in the future, regardless of what you've already put in. Those sunk costs, they're gone.
So you got to be willing to cut your losses, huh? Even if it hurts.
Tough lesson, but an important one. Sometimes the best decision, the bravest decision, is to just say, okay, this isn't working, time to move on.
Deep. Okay, so all this talk about biases and like mental traps, it's making me think, is my brain working against me? Are there any like tools or techniques that can help us overcome these limitations and make more rational decisions?
One approach the papers mentioned is the analytic hierarchy process, or AHP. It's about breaking a big, complex decision into smaller pieces. And then you use these pairwise comparisons to figure out which factors are the most important.
The paper used the example of a company deciding where to build a new factory, right? They had to weigh stuff like cost, labor, transportation, all that.
Right. And the AHP, it helps you organize those factors into a hierarchy and then compare them systematically to figure out how much each one matters. It's really helpful for decisions that involve, like, subjective judgment or preferences, because it gives you a way to quantify those things.
So instead of just going with your gut or whoever shouts the loudest, you have a framework to guide you.
Right.
Make sure you're considering everything.
Exactly. And what's cool is the AHP has these built-in consistency checks. Since you're making a bunch of comparisons, you can spot if any of your judgments don't really make sense.
Like a built-in DS detector. Helps you find the flaws in your thinking.
Yeah, a way to make sure your decisions are based on solid logic.
That's reassuring. But these tools, they seem very, human-focused. What about AI? One of the papers mentioned expert systems, which sounds like they could automate a lot of this decision stuff.
Expert systems, yeah, they're basically computer programs that try to copy human expertise in a specific area. They usually use a set of rules or knowledge base that's been, like, extracted from human experts in that field.
It's like having a digital consultant. The paper had examples of them being used in marketing and finance for things like market segmentation, pricing, fraud detection, all that.
Yep. And as AI gets more advanced, these expert systems are getting more sophisticated. They can handle more complex tasks.
So could we get to a point where machines are making all the big decisions for us?
Ooh, that's a big question, but a lot of ethical stuff to consider, right?
Yeah.
Expert systems, they can be super helpful, but they have limitations. One challenge is knowledge acquisition, which is basically, how do you get that expertise out of a human's brain and into a computer program? not easy.
So even if you have the best experts, it's hard to, like, capture their knowledge and turn it into code.
Right. And then you got to validate it, make sure the expert system is actually making good decisions, not spitting out nonsense. You have to test it, make sure it's reliable.
Makes sense. You wouldn't trust a self-driving car without testing it first, you know? Make sure it's safe.
And don't forget, even the most advanced AI, it's still built by humans. So it reflects our biases, our limitations.
So it's not just about handing over control to machines. We still need humans in the loop, right?
Absolutely. It's finding that balance, human expertise plus AI. AI can be a huge asset, but we have to use it wisely.
Okay, good to know. But let's talk about a different kind of tool, one that feels more, I don't know, human-based. The Delphi method. The textbook describes it as a way to, like, gather expert opinions and find consensus, especially when you can't get all those experts in a room together.
The Delphi method, yeah, it's like brainstorming, but structured, and it's all done in writing anonymously. You send out questionnaires to a bunch of experts, then their answers are like summarized and sent back to the group. You do this a few times, and eventually you get a consensus, or at least you narrow down the range of opinions.
Interesting. So it's a way to tap into that collective wisdom, but without letting, like, strong personalities take over or office politics, all that.
Right. The anonymity helps make sure everyone feels comfortable sharing their honest thoughts.
The textbook said the Delphi method is often used for forecasting or for decisions about really complex issues where there's no obvious right answer.
Yep. It's been used to predict what technologies will take off, assess risks to the environment, even to help develop public policy.
So it's like a way to use expert insight to navigate the unknown.
Pretty much. But of course, like anything, it has limits. It can be time-consuming, expensive, and you got to watch out for bias, either in the experts you choose or in the questions you ask.
No magic bullets, huh? But still, a valuable tool to have.
Definitely. The trick is picking the right tool for the situation. And that means understanding the strengths and weaknesses of each approach.
Okay, this is all starting to come together. But now I'm curious about something else. How do we deal with the pressure of making decisions when the stakes are high? You know, for me, when I'm stressed, my brain either shuts down or it goes into overdrive, and neither of those is good for making smart choices.
Decision-making under pressure, it's tough for everyone. Stress can really mess with our cognitive abilities. You end up with impulsive decisions, or you get paralyzed, can't decide anything.
So how do you stay cool and make good decisions when, you know, the heat is on? So how do you stay cool and make good decisions when, you know, the heat is on?
Well, one thing is preparation. It goes a long way. Like if you know you're heading into a high-pressure situation, try to, think ahead. What decisions might I have to make? What are my options? That kind of thing.
So it's like having a game plan, so you're not totally caught off guard.
Yeah, exactly. And it can actually help to practice making decisions under pressure.
How do you even practice that?
Oh, there are different ways. You can role-play different scenarios or do simulations. There are even apps and online games, believe it or not, that are designed to help you get better at making decisions when the pressure's on.
Wow. I'll have to look for those. So besides preparation, any other tips, like in the moment, what can you do?
One of the simplest things, honestly, but it really works, is to just focus on your breathing. When we get stressed, our breathing, it gets all shallow and fast, and that just makes the anxiety worse.
It's like when you're watching a scary movie and you realize you're holding your breath, right?
Yeah, exactly. But if you consciously take slow, deep breaths, it calms your whole system down, and it can actually help you think more clearly.
So don't forget to breathe. Sounds so basic, but I bet it makes a huge difference.
It really does. And never underestimate the power of asking for help. You're feeling overwhelmed, unsure, whatever. Reach out to someone, a colleague, a mentor, a friend, someone you trust.
Yeah, sometimes just talking it through with someone, it helps you see things from a different angle, you know?
A fresh perspective can be huge in those situations.
Okay, this has all been super helpful. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to go back to something we talked about earlier. Learning from our decisions. It's one thing to understand all these concepts, right? But how do we actually make sure we're using them, making better choices down the road?
One practical thing you can do is keep a decision journal. Like after you make a decision, just take a few minutes to, reflect on it. What process did you use?
Right.
What factors did you consider? What was the outcome?
So like a post-game analysis for your decisions.
Exactly. Write down what worked, what you could have done differently, any insights you gained, and then, go back and review your journal every now and then. You'll start to see patterns in your decision making, and you can adjust your process as you go.
Oh, that's such a good idea. I'm totally going to start doing that. It's like having a personal coach, but for decision making.
And another thing, Get feedback from other people. Talk
Yes.
to folks who are involved in the decision or who might have a different take on things.
Get some constructive criticism, huh?
Yeah, feedback can help you see your blind spots, areas where you can improve.
Like having a team of advisors helping you level up your decision-making game.
Exactly. Because remember, decision making, it's not always a solo thing. A lot of times it's a team effort.
Well, this deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about and a bunch of new tools to try. Thanks for sharing your expertise.
My pleasure. And remember, decision making, it's a skill. We can all get better at it. So experiment, try new things, and learn from every decision you make.
Great advice. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of decision-making.